All right, well, we're going to get started. It's 12 o'clock. I'm glad all of you are here. Such a crowd. Say again? Yeah, I think a few more might be coming from Harper's class. So just want to welcome you again today. We are talking about research and documentation. And I think this is a very important subject, and it's particularly important in my mind for students to really know what we are talking about when we talk about research. And so we're going to talk about APA and MLA today, but I also want to talk about sort of the significance of research as it relates to higher education, which is what we're all here for. So I'm going to be weaving that in as we go. Just want to let you know right quick here at the beginning, we have another workshop. We have two more workshops coming up we want to make you aware of. We have a special one, a guest author, writer, editor, and agent is coming. Her name is Javon Bolden. So if you or someone you know is interested in writing and publishing, she's going to be here to talk to us about how to do that. So just want to put a little plug in for that. And then our next workshop will be on journaling. And I know that most people think, oh, that one isn't for me, but I will actually be talking about how journal writing and journaling can be beneficial for you as students and professionals. Most people who are successful do some form of journaling in their career and in their personal and professional work. And so I'll talk about how you might be able to, there's various types of journals that you might be able to keep, and it can also help you in your academic writing as well, just really helping you to understand what it means to be a writer and or to use writing in whatever it is that you do in your daily life. So that's what that one will be about. I invite you to come back for that as well. That will be, remember the date of that one? Sounds good. Yeah, we'll put things out. We'll send out information about it. It's the second week in July, so I think that one's scheduled. All right, so let's get into what we have today. What format is that is the title of our workshop. By the way, Ariana. Yes. And I'm Dr. Roper, in case anyone didn't remember that. Okay. So I don't want us to miss the point. A lot of times when students come in looking for help with APA and MLA, they only are focused on the format of their paper. And I don't want us to lose what's really important in research writing. In addition or aside from the actual documentation, is the writing of the research paper itself. Whoa. So writing a research paper is about adding to your knowledge. And if you begin any research writing project with that thought in mind, the rest will follow, right? The goal is to add to your knowledge. So you want to begin by reading for understanding the sources that you find. If you are attempting to add to your knowledge, then as you read the information that is connected to your topic, you will be absorbing that information and then doing something with it in your research, okay? So the research is not let me tack on some information here at the end of this paper that I wrote, but rather it is, how does this paper that I write, that I'm writing, demonstrate what I now know about this topic as a result of the reading that I have done on that topic. And depending on the type of research paper you're writing, you will either be defending a particular point of view or aligning yourself with a particular way of thinking within a particular area of study. And so the research that you bring into that is about showing the relationship of those ideas that you're writing about or that you're arguing for in relation to those that are already out there and already exist. And when you align yourself with sources that are credible and that are known to be expertise in that field of study, you are then showing and demonstrating that you have a right to be there, be here, talking about that thing as well. You're basically making yourself an expert by becoming acquainted with those that have expertise on that subject. And that's really what research writing is about. And so I don't want us to be limited in our thinking that I just got to get this over with for this class, because we're all here to make ourselves educated scholars. And so by reading the scholarship is how you do that, and then doing something with that information that you find is how you demonstrate what you know. Does that make sense? All right.
Okay, so you may have like a research versus a research proposal. So the research proposal is going to be done before you actually do your research paper in some classes. So the proposal is like the proposed research that you want to conduct, and it'll discuss the summary. It'll have a summary of information you want to discuss, as well as the description of the research that you want to perform. It includes your title, your introduction, hypothesis, methods, and references.
I want to pause you right there, and that connects perfectly to what I just said. How, because a lot of times you might be stuck at that stage, right? Like, what should my proposal be? Well, you gotta have to begin by doing some reading and acquainting yourself with the theories or the subject matter in order to even know what it is you want to propose that you do in your further research. So even before you can get to that first step of creating a proposal for a research project, you have to have done some reading and some thinking about what is valuable to do or propose in the first place.
You might want to read. You might want to add to a topic on research. So you might need to do something different than what's already been done. So that's what you're going to focus on in your research proposal as far as that. And then the research paper. So this is after your research proposal has been approved. You've done your research already. You have conclusions, results, and you're discussing the limitation of your research. So it's not only a summary, but of primary and topic sources, but it's a genre that requires investigating those sources. Okay, it reports, yeah, it's a report of the research that you have completed, and it's the overall completion of the research. So you have the abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, and everything like that. Figures, tables, and okay. Oh, that's my bad. Okay.
I'm waiting on you. So, yes, you can go to the first point. So why is documentation needed? Why is it that we have to cite sources in the first place? It goes back to, oh, there we go. The idea that I was speaking of before. Research is about the joining a conversation, and you're never writing in a vacuum. So anything that you're writing about is to demonstrate how this point of view or this study that you have done compares to others that have been done, or reveals something about this subject that is new or different, or in some way or another nuanced according to the way you have approached it. And so documentation is a way to demonstrate the extent to which you've tried to make yourself an expert on a particular subject. The more sources and the better sources you have, the greater the sort of credibility you have as one who has the right to speak on this particular subject. All right, so by documenting, you show how thorough you've been in looking at the issue or topic from all sides in relation to what others have done. And then, as I said, by the kind and the number of sources, you give yourself credibility. In graduate study especially, it's a way to position yourself within a particular camp. So depending on your field of study, right? So if you're an English major, for example, there are areas within English of expertise. There are individuals who focus on Shakespeare, for example, within English. There are those who focus on writing and rhetoric in the camp of English, right? So depending on what it is I'm writing about and who it is I'm citing, I will demonstrate that I'm aligning myself with a particular area of this broader topic. So it's really, you have to be really intentional when you're seeking out resources about where you get them from and who it is that you cite. And a lot of times I know students just come in and pull up the first thing that pops up on Google, but that's not really the way to make yourself a scholar and demonstrate your scholarship, by just picking the first thing that comes up to the top of a Google search, right? If you're really thoughtful about it, and once you move on through education and get into your graduate school degrees and that sort of thing, you will become aware, because your professors will be talking to you about particular scholars in the field, and you'll know who those individuals are that you need to read about and become familiar with their work. So what you're doing in undergrad sort of will continue to grow as you go on. And then, academic integrity, of course, when you are, as you know, more than anything, professors are going to be wanting to know that you're being that you have academic integrity and that you are giving credit where credit is due, and you're not just cutting and pasting things into your document without thinking about it and without showing where those ideas came from. Again, it goes back to research being about showing the relationship. You all have written compare and contrast papers, right? In a way, it's like that. When you bring in a source from somewhere else, you want to show the relationship of that idea to yours, or from the relationship of that idea to others. And in order to do that, you have to document, well, this person said this, and who is this person? You have to kind of show who that person is and explain who that person is and how their point of view connects to what you are thinking or what someone else has said. And so, as I said, it's kind of like a conversation that you have to provide for your reader the information that they need so they can understand who it was that said that and who it was that opposed that, and so forth. And then also, this is also something that's really important for you as the researcher and for anyone else who would follow you and read the work that you have put out. Documenting those sources will help you when you're looking for information. If you find a really good article on a topic, go to their reference page, go to their works cited list, and those sources can be useful for you. It can help you to find others like that one that will be really beneficial for the subject that you're writing on. And so it's the same thing. When you write on something, you're allowing your sources to be known so that anyone else who's interested in that topic can also find that information that you used in your paper. So it works both ways. So why are there different styles of documentation? Why do we have to do sometimes APA, sometimes MLA, sometimes these other ones? There's so many, Chicago, Turabian, CSE and CBE, there's so many, but they all are specific to subject fields. So those in the humanities have a preference for how sources are cited. Those in the social sciences have their own way that they want information to be shared. And so it just has to do with the field of study that you are operating in and the expectations of those individuals in that particular field. It's as simple as that. There's a lot of overlap in the way that these various styles of documentation work. There's some basic information that, of course, they all need you to provide. It's just a preference depending on the field. And some of that has to do with the field itself and what is valued in that particular profession. So what is valuable to those in the humanities is who is it that said that? Who was that person that made that argument or provided that information or wrote that literary work, right? That is more important than when it was written, because a lot of the texts that are used in the humanities are older texts anyway. We cite Shakespeare and Plato, and so it doesn't really so much matter when that was published as it is who it was that published it. And so the way that MLA works is to highlight and focus more so on the author and less so on the when that particular author spoke. And so they also prefer in the reading of their text in that field that the information be prominent and that the citation of where it came from be less distracting. So that's also the reason why the MLA style is used, because it serves that particular purpose. In the sciences and the social sciences, the currency of the information is what is more important. When was that study done? When did that information come out? As well as who it was that published it. So in the social sciences, the use of the APA emphasizes that year of publication, right? So that's going to be really prominent in the citing of that particular source, because those in that field are going to be interested in, okay, you're citing that particular work, when was that published, right? They're going to want to, that's going to be a really important question in your reader's mind in that field. And so that's why they use that particular style in APA. All right, there are others, as I mentioned, CSE and CBE, which have preferred ways to provide the way the research was done, particularly in the biological sciences. You have a lot of experimentation, and the methods and procedures need to be explained in a particular way. But it all has to do with what is valued in that field. And let me just say right off the top, No one in any field is expected to memorize the style of documentation for that particular field, right? It changes. They gather in these committee meetings once a year, once every couple of years, and they decide they want different things to be done or different ways to be used. And so you'll have a new edition of the APA, manual coming out next year, or the MLA. And so it's more important to have the basic concept of what is valued for that style of documentation, rather than trying to memorize how it is for every single type of source. Follow the pattern, have the basic the basic information that's required, and then use that manual that you have. It's going to be about knowing what kind of source you have, and then finding the instructions for how to cite that source in your manual. Simple as that. It's kind of like following a recipe. There's no way that you're going to be able to memorize all the different ways that particular sources are cited in that particular style of documentation. But the more you use, let's say APA or MLA, the more familiar you'll become with the way it's done for that particular style. And so it does become a little bit intuitive as you do it more. So I realize that technology is a great thing, and we certainly have technology that allows citing of sources to be simplified. And so I know I have students ask me all the time, well, I'll just use the cite generator that I have in my software. And that's fine, but I want to just give a word of caution in the use of those citation generators. Ariana, you want to go through those?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So citation machine, easy bib, even using Word, that you can sometimes leave out certain specific type subjects that need to go in your reference or works cited page. And so they rely on your input. So if you forgot something, then it's not going to put it in there in most cases. And sometimes they pull from different websites and not actually from the book or the journal that you got it from. They can't exercise any judgment of their own. They can't go back and change. And sometimes they can't even tell in between formats. So for MLA, you would capitalize each letter of the title, and for APA, you wouldn't capitalize each letter. So they can't determine those differences. Rather than parallel tools. If a writer gives the generators inaccurate, it's not able to sort out errors.
So it helps to have some basic knowledge of that particular style of documentation, even if you're using one of those EasyBib type software, because that way you can eyeball, once it generates the citation for you, whether it looks like it's in keeping with the standard. And that's important. If you don't know the standard, then you won't know that it's wrong. So little things like spelling and capitalization, as Ariana mentioned, in APA, the way titles are capitalized is different from the way in MLA they are capitalized. So being aware of that, knowing the type of source that you have, which we're going to talk a little bit about. Magazine articles are not the same as journal articles, and they're not going to be cited exactly the same. There might be slight differences. If you accessed an article through a database, it will be cited a little bit differently than if you just pulled it off the shelf or went to the website directly. And so knowing those particular little details will make sure that you are inputting the necessary information so that it comes out correctly. Also double checking. If you're just cutting and pasting and not looking back at it, you might even have lingering placeholders in that, in EasyBib, and if you don't go back and fix that, maybe the date wasn't there or the publisher wasn't listed. If you didn't put that information in, those templates will just leave the space holder there, and your professor probably won't like that too much.
It can also change your format a little, like your what font you use, what font size you use, all of that. And then, okay.
Oh, so the in-text citation. So when you're citing your source in the body of your paper, that correlates with the listing that you have on your works cited page. And so in the body of your paper, we're going to look at some examples. If you mention the author in the sentence with a signal phrase and then use either paraphrase or quote, in the parentheses, you don't need to repeat the author's last name because you mentioned it in the sentence. And so little things like that, you'll need to adjust when you're using those citation generators in the body of your paper, because it won't know to take the author's last name out of the in-text citation because you have the author's name in your sentence, right? That's something only you as a human who can judge those things would be able to pick up and make the necessary change to.
Okay, so now we're getting into the basics of MLA. Okay, so MLA is typed on 8.5 by 11 paper. Everything is double spaced. It's Times New Roman 12 point font, and there's no title page. You only leave one space after a punctuation mark, so a period or exclamation point or question mark if you use that. And all margins are 1 inch, and you did the first line of paragraphs by 1/2 inch. And it has a header on each page with your last name and the page number. So here's an example of MLA formatted first page. So there's no title page. Up here you have your name, your professor's name, the subject of the class, and then you have the date. And your title is center formatted, and then up here you use your last name and the page number as your header.
One thing I just wanted to point out is that it is just double spaced throughout, including the heading, and there's no extra spaces between paragraphs. So sometimes in double spacing, you might hit return again for the next paragraph, but you don't need that extra space. It should just all be uniform throughout.
Okay, and now APA. So it has those same, APA and MLA kind of have the same factors, but it's different in how they want everything. So APA does have a title page, and everything is centered on that title page, 12-point font, and everything is double spaced. You indent the first line of a paragraph, and then every page of your essay should have the running head, which is your title in all caps, and should also have the page number. Okay, and this is like the basic title page of an APA formatted paper. It's always going to have your title, your name, and then your institutional affiliation. And sometimes your teachers may want you to have the date, and they may also want you to add their name too. Yes.
About the numbering. You have so many options, right? Left.
What does APA require? Top right.
Top right side.
Top right. There's one where they have the last name and the number.
That's MLA.
So that's MLA.
That's
This is APA. Just the running head and the page number to the right.
So the running head is on the left and the page number is on the right. They're never together in APA.
For APA.
right. So MLA, you have the name, the name, of course. So if my paper was more than 1 page, I would add my last name.
Correct.
Yes.
And on the first page of MLA, there's no page number. The page number. So in Word, you can do an option. There's an option for a different first page. You would choose that because in MLA, the first page just has that header, the title, and the body of the paper as we demonstrated. And then your page numbering actually begins on the second page, second and subsequent pages. So yes, you would have your last name and the number 2. And then each page after that would have your last name and the page number.
Well, in some cases, if your title is longer than 50 characters, you would put an abbreviated title. You wouldn't put the whole title. So right here, so it's like the beginning of your title, but you might have to shorten it because it can't be over 50 characters. So if your title was going all the way over here, you would need to shorten it.
But it is the title of your paper.
Yes,
that's what it
it's the
is. Unless your title is too long. I mean, it would still be your title. It would just be a shortened version of your title if it's too long. Yep.
Okay, so now the headings. So they're optional in MLA. Well, they're optional in both. And they should usually be numbered, but you can also do different levels to the headings. So you would do one by the Roman numbers, yeah. Roman numbers, so 1 and 1.1 and 2.2, things like that. If you have another subject going under your initial topic, your initial heading.
So real quick about headings or subheadings really is what she's talking about. The use of them or not is really about the organization of your paper, and headings serve as signals for your reader about what is going to be discussed in this portion of the paper. And so if you think of it as an outline, you know how when you have an outline, you have your main point and your subpoints. That is what would be these subheadings if you wanted to help your reader follow the points that you're making. So here's my main point, that's your title, right? And then that main point might be divided into subpoints that you would provide a little phrase that kind of sums up what is being discussed in this aspect of the paper. And then if you're further sort of breaking it down, you might have subheadings under the subheadings, and that's what she's showing is the format that would follow. But that's really specific to the type of paper that you're writing and the kinds of information that you're providing and the points that you're making. The longer the paper, the more in-depth your topic, the greater number of subheadings you might need to provide as a way to help your reader to navigate the argument that you're making. I think this gives a good sort of basic format that you need to follow. You know, if you're writing a paper that requires or that in any way would necessitate this number of subheadings, that's something that I think would be helpful for you to talk to one of us about, because it really has to do with the organization of your ideas and helping your reader to be able to stay with you. And so that's going to be really specific to the content of a particular paper. I don't know how useful this will be in abstract if you don't have a paper that's utilizing that kind of organization. But it's good to know that there's a way to do it when you do.
And then we have the APA headings. So with APA headings, it's those level headings. You don't use numbers. So this is like the specific, like level 2 and level 1 is just the subheadings in each one. So for a level 3 heading, you might have something that you need to split up also in those headings. And you can even split up something in a level 4 heading, and that goes to a level 5 heading. And it just depends
on and on.
Yeah, you can just go forever, honestly. Okay, and then the in-text citations for MLA.
So in the body of your paper, as I mentioned before, you want to show the relationship of ideas. And it's really important for you whenever you're incorporating either a quote or a paraphrase or a summary of some source that you explain to your reader why it's relevant or how it's relevant. The best way to do that rather than quote is to summarize or paraphrase. But there's a variety of ways that you can do that. If you're going to quote, you typically should quote something that can't be said any better than the way it was said in the original. If you could say that same thing in your own way, I would suggest doing that and just crediting the source with the idea. So it's important to remember whether you say it in their words or in your words, if it is their idea or their concept, you have to cite it. So that doesn't change. But it's a good idea as much as possible for you to say it in your own words, because then that demonstrates that you understood what was said and that you're showing the relationship of that point or that idea to something else that you're saying. And so in-text citation is all about just signaling to your reader the points in your paper at which you are borrowing information or ideas from another source. And it's important to distinguish when you start and stop that use of the source so that they are aware when you are going on with your point from your own perspective and not someone else's. And so sometimes that's a tricky one, because you might say according to this first person and then go on writing to the end of the paper, and we as the reader have no idea where you stopped drawing from that source, right? So you gotta give us the point at which you stop using that source, and that's where that parenthetical citation is important. That's what the information that comes in the parentheses. That's all that is.
So, and then it shouldn't be obtrusive. You shouldn't have a random, just a quote placed in your paragraph, just randomly. You need to introduce the quote, and you also need to detail why you use that quote.
Explain it. Yep.
Because that's your
Yes. So you can take the idea that you got from that source and say it in your own way, and then just in the parentheses, when you're finished making that point, just in parentheses put that author's last name if it's MLA and the page number, or the author's last name and the year if it's APA. So yeah, so you may not need to signal phrase because you may just really have absorbed that knowledge from that source and you want to say it in your own way, but you still just need to indicate that concept came from that source. So you would definitely need to put it at the end. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I don't. What is it in APA when you don't have a page number? I don't remember. Paragraph number?
Yes, paragraph number.
Yes. So there's different ways if you don't have a page that you can cite. But yes, the author's last name for sure. If you have the author's name, signaling that in the signal phrase too, mentioning the author in the signal phrase, and then in the parentheses you can also. For example, if you don't have an author's name, you would go to the next thing that you do have, which might be the title of that work, right? So remember that what's in the parentheses is going to correlate with what is on your works cited list. So the author's last name and first name is always listed first. If you don't have that, the next thing that would be listed would be the title. And so if you didn't have the author's name, to cite it in the body of the paper, what goes in the parentheses should correlate with the first thing that would be listed on the works cited page. So that might be the title. And then I would see that title and go to your works cited, and that would be the first thing I'd see listed for that source is the title. Please, no dumb questions. Go ahead. Yes.
Paragraph number for that particular page.
Right, in the entire thing, yes. And that's for APA. For MLA, you would just put the author's last name. But in APA, yes, you would put the paragraph number.
If you're not quoting.
Abbreviated paragraph.
Yes, I think we have an example of that, yes. Yeah, we are looking at MLA. So we're gonna move ahead and then we'll show you an example. In MLA, you see Wordsworth stated that romantic poetry was marked by a, quote, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So there's a portion of the original that is pulled into this sentence. And because we mentioned the author's last name in the sentence, we just have the page number.
It's the same concept. So romantic poetry is characterized by the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So the signal phrase with this one, we didn't use his name. We just paraphrased like you said you would. So that's when you place in the last name, the author's name, and the page number. And then Wordsworth extensively explored the role of emotion. So this one, he didn't even use a quote.
Go back.
There was not even a quote in that one. But you used his name, so you would only need the page number again.
Right, so they didn't quote directly, but the idea was there that came from him, and so you're acknowledging where that came from.
And you will never put a page number in the actual sentence. It will always appear in the parentheses after the sentence is written.
Yes, very important. Don't say Wordsworth on page 263 says.
The only time you put is just the numbers if it's unadopted.
If the author is unknown, then what goes in the parentheses would be the next thing that we would find, which would be the thing that we would find on the works cited page. So the next thing that you would have would be the title of that work, if you didn't know the author.
That's Wordsworth, that's the last name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
I see
nice.
it in the actual.
Right.
Okay, and then the long citations for MLA. If the quotations are more than 5 lines of text, you need to start a new line, and you actually indent it 1 inch from left alignment, and you make sure that it's still double spaced. You don't add quotation marks because it's indented. Readers will know that this is a quote, and it's the long quote. Mm-hmm. And if there's a paragraph that begins in the middle of the quotation, indent its first line. Oh, and you also need to, okay, so you also need to introduce the quote that you're gonna make, which you said before. So you're not just putting a big giant quote, that you introduce it.
Actually, the longer a passage that is being borrowed in this way, the longer it is, the more you need to sort of frame it for the reader so that you don't assume that the quote speaks for itself, because the quote speaks, but my interpretation of it is going to be my own. You want to dictate what your reader takes from that quote, or what it means in the context of your paper. So you introduce it, after you quote, you comment on it, right? I call it the sandwich, right? You have the quote in the middle and you have the bun on top and the bottom. And that's your sort of framing the quote and explaining its significance or importance. You had a question.
Yes, so, some articles have, so in previous rounds, I put my first offer,
Oh,
and then hit all.
right.
Can I do that in any format or certain?
So multiple authors, each style of documentation has a rule for multiple authors. So look up in MLA, what is the requirement for multiple authors in MLA? I think that it is, if it's more than 3 authors, you do the et al. And if it's 2 authors, you would actually list both. So, and then APA has its rule for multiple authors as well. You're more familiar with APA.
For APA, it's, for the first 2, if there's 2 authors, you list both. And then if there's 3, for the first time, you list all 3. And then you do the first author et al. And then for 4 and 5, you do the same thing. And then the sequential citations are at first author's name and then et al. And then for 6, you just do et al. For all of them. 6 or more authors.
So again, we don't expect you to remember that. We're not going to quiz you later on what do you do for multiple authors, right? You just know when I go to cite this, I have multiple authors. Let me look up the rule for that for APA.
What's a good source to look up? You said how come up with versions.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, we get a Google, and we're like, okay, well, let's see if we can figure this out.
No, certainly you want to use the most recent version, unless you have a professor that prefers a particular version. I have had professors who said, I know they changed it last year, but I'm going with the one before. So find out which version of APA or MLA your professor requires. If there's not a requirement, always go with the most recent edition of that. The best online source is the Purdue OWL. The Purdue OWL, yes. Otherwise, if you have, they have some classes require that you purchase the hard copy manual for APA or MLA, and in which case you would use that. But go-to source, the Purdue OWL, we'll pull that up at the end and show you what it looks like. But it's so convenient and easy to use, and it's always up to date. And professionals across the country rely on that. So you're pretty safe if you're using the instructions from that site for these rules. Yeah.
And then the APA in-text citations, so they must include author and year. And this is different from MLA because MLA has just the page number and the author. Because she said that they want the most current sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, the most current sources. That's why you have the year in there. And so these are examples of that. So when you're citing an electronic source, always cite author date style, and if it lacks page numbers, identify with the paragraph number, as you said before.
And that is the paragraph within the body of the like, you count from the first paragraph to the point where you're citing. That's how you know which one.
It might be paragraph 86, but you gotta count so they can know exactly where it came from. Yes. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I was just
Good.
Okay. So this first paragraph is actually paraphrased, and it has the citations the way there's 4 more authors. So the first time you have all 4 authors, and then anytime after that you would say et al. And then with this one we have the date inside of the sentence.
There you go.
And so we would actually have also we have the date and the author. so we wouldn't need the page number because it's not quoted. Okay, and then this one is quoted. So we have, so some factors that deter Indigenous women from seeking help are a lack of standardized protocol, jurisdictional confusion, delayed intervention, non-prosecution, police discretion, distrust, and breaches of confidentiality. So when you're quoting something, you need the last name, the date, and the page number for the paragraph.
So in the one where it was just paraphrased, you mentioned the author and the year, and that signals to the reader, if I go to the works cited page, I'll see that author and year and the other information from that source listed. So either way, you're providing your reader with the information that they need to know how to find that source. And that's the point.
And then for the long in-text oh my gosh, in-text citation, if the quote is longer than 40 words, you should indent it and start on a new line. And you also don't use quotation marks when you introduce it. Yes, go back.
Okay.
Okay, so the MLA works cited page.
So what Ariana has provided us here is the basic sort of structure of APA citations versus MLA citations. And this is just a way, as I said before, for you to know the basic information that that's going to be needed for that particular source and the order in which it would be listed on your works cited page. Again, there's going to be specific nuances and particularities depending on the type of source that you have that will in some way or another adjust this basic frame, but kind of having an idea for APA, you have author and year and then the other stuff that is very similar to some of the other citations, that can just get you started in the sense that generally how it should look. And then you can go and figure out those particularities with your particular source. And so, again, it's not about memorization, it's about getting the general sense of how each style works and what they prioritize. So with the MLA, the author and title of the source will be the first two things that you would look to, and you want to make sure you have. When you're doing your research, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of those kinds of things, that kind of information. How many of you have put together a works cited page after the fact and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't find that source anymore? Do it when you have it. Like as soon as you find it, just go ahead and capture the author, the title, where you found that particular thing. So that's this title of container is the thing itself. Is it a publication? Is it a journal? Is it a book? Is it a website? That's the container within which this source was contained.
So that was, I know this is a hard question, but like that's a question I've always had. How do instructors take my reference and go and find that exact reference? How do they plug that in? Because I've jotted down like, oh, I found this source I think it's cool. It's the author's title. And then I go back later and try to Google search all that and nothing comes up. So how do I take that?
And that's why it's so important to provide all of the other pieces so that it can be found either by you or someone else again. And there's different ways. So if you found it and so really it just begins with how did you get to that source? Did you go into a database? If so, then that information needs to be provided to your instructor, the information about the database. That's the container within which your source was contained, right?
So you use like Expo,
Yes.
They have to know where you got it from.
Yes.
I always thought they could have some type of special program or something they plug it into.
No, we use the information that you provide in the same way that you use the information that your sources provide you to get to it. Now, the more research you do, the more familiar you are with the places to find sources. So sometimes when students don't give us a whole lot, we can still find it because just the familiarity with where things are housed. But really, it's just about knowing how to get to the place where you found it. And that is why these things are necessary. And the container and contained in particular, because sometimes you have things that are inside of things. And so if you provide the information for the database, then provide the information for the journal that was in the database, it makes it all the more easier. It makes it all the more easy to find that source. And that's also why it's important when you're doing those database searches that you keep track of the database and the source that you found in it too, so that you can provide that for your works cited. Yeah.
So this is actually plugging those pieces in. So we have the first name, last name of the author, and we have the title and where it came from. And other contributors is something that we don't always find. So it might be somebody who translated or who edited it, and that's where you would place that. And then you have the volume number, the version, the number, publisher, and publication date, and then location. So with the location, also you need to be as specific as possible. If they say New York City, New York, you need to put it in there. Yes. And they're each made of core elements, and they're given in a specific order. In most cases, this is the basic order, but you might have to add other things in.
Again, going to your manual to look at what the order would be, for example, if you had a database, because that would be additional information that would need to be plugged in after the initial information that you provide. So a lot of times with both APA and MLA, I would say the first 3 things are pretty standard. And then after that, it's dependent upon the type of source that you have, where you will need to build in additional pieces for that particular type of source.
And this is just an example of a works cited page.
And what happens when you're familiar with formatting for APA or MLA, I can look at these sources and tell you what kind of source it is by the way it's formatted. I can tell a book, for example, from a journal article, from a website, just quickly looking at it, because I know that if it comes from a database, there's going to be the author and the title and the information about that text, in addition to something like EBSCOhost or Academic Search Elite. And there might be a DOI, which is how it's an identifier for sources within databases, right? There's less information if it's a book, right? You just have author, title, and the publisher and the year a lot of times. So it's these formats help to easily identify the kind of source that it is.
Like the first source at the top, you are supposed to include the article.
Yes.
I didn't know. I mean, you know, like when it include like the education matriculation, like you get so many different things.
Because it changes, and that's why I was like, don't drive yourself crazy trying to memorize every one. They didn't used to require the URL, and then in the most recent edition of MLA, they put it back. Yeah. So that's yeah, and that's where students get confused, because it's like, oh, I thought you did. No, you didn't. No. Yeah, it does change, and so you just go with what the most recent thing is. There used to be, with MLA, we used to put web if it was a web source, and print if it was a print source. But they did away with that. Yeah, just to drive us crazy.
And the data that you access.
Date of access. They don't do date of access
I don't
anymore?
think so.
I haven't seen it in a minute.
I haven't.
See, I can't even keep up. But yeah.
They did used to do it though.
Yeah.
And then the APA reference page. So it's all the core elements. You send it a title at the top of the page. It's not bolded. This is just how it looks like. This is talking about how it looks. And you flush the left line of the entry and everything. So it's hanging indented. And the entries are ordered
Alphabetically, yes. Little things like that, depending on how picky your professor is, can mess you up. The alphabet, I can't say that word either. Whether it's alphabetical, sometimes students will just number, don't do that. There's those little things, seem little, but it's not APA if you don't do it the way the APA style dictates. So that's the point.
Okay, so these are those specific things that go into an APA citation. So it's the last name, first initial, instead of both the first name and last name. Fully out. the title of the work. So this is different also because you also put in that year in. That's different from MLA. Publication name, volume number, publication date, page numbers, and then the DOI or the URL. In some cases, they do not want you to put the DOI, but you can. It depends on your teacher also.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's also an example of doing that. And in this case, we did use the DOI. And
notice the formatting for the volume and issue number. The volume number is outside of the parentheses, the issue number is inside the parentheses.
Yes.
So if you were to put volume and issue, that wouldn't be APA any longer, right? Because they don't format it that way. They do it like this.
And the volume number is italicized and the issue number isn't. Okay, and then this is a reference page example. So it's hanging indent, like I said, it's in alphabetical order, but it's ascending. So A's, it follows A to Z instead of Z to A. It's double spaced, and your reference cannot be inside of the body if it's not on the reference page, and that's the same for works cited. And then it cannot be listed on the reference page if it's not documented in text with an in-text citation.
So again, there's that relationship between what's in the body of the paper and what's listed on the reference page. There needs to be a one-to-one relation between each of those. And there is a thing called works consulted that some teachers might ask you to create a list of works that you consulted but maybe did not cite in the paper. That's less common, but I have had that happen before, because there may be things that when you're researching, you're reading a lot of stuff and you may not use everything specifically in the paper in terms of quote or paraphrase, but it may be informing your thinking on that. And so, but in what she just said, you only put on your works cited or reference page those things that you actually use in a specific way. But there is a thing called a works consulted, which would be where you would list everything that you looked at, whether you used it or not. So that's just a little, that was free. You don't have to pay for that one. Okay, so I just want to say a word about Google searching. You know, Google has its place. I use it all the time, right? It's great in our everyday lives to go to Google for information. But by choosing to bypass your library resources because Google is convenient, you're actually cheapening your experience here at the institution, and you're actually doing yourself a disservice as someone who is seeking higher education. As I said, Google serves a purpose, but when you're doing serious academic study, you need to be assured that the information you find is accurate and trustworthy, and that's what libraries are for. The resources that we're going to show you that you can access through the library are the best of the best. You have experts in the field who have gleaned together the best of information that there is on your area, your subject area, your field of study. And so why would you go to the garbage heap to see if you can find something valuable? Maybe you will get lucky. I've found some great stuff on the side of the road that people have thrown out. But if I really want something of value, I'm going to go to a store instead of my curb. That's easily accessible to everyone, right? And so if you think of the library resources as that premier resource that is available to you who is here as a privileged student and scholar, then, and you're paying for it, you know, it really doesn't make sense not to take advantage of it. Yeah. So just to show you that the library has everything, these are two news articles, right? One I accessed from a website or webpage. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going out to the internet to find sources, because you can find good information. If you're needing current information on a current news, you know, event or something that's going on right now, those things are, the web is useful for that type of search. But you can also find news sources in the library databases too. And So, just know that these are available as well, particularly if you're looking for maybe something in a common publication that occurred some years ago. That's going to be harder to find on Google, right? So depending on the kind of source that you're needing and the kind of writing that you're doing, sometimes the sources that you need will be best found in the database as well. What I wanted to show you with these two sources also is this whole container versus contained thing that we were talking about in citing. If I did go out to the web and find this news source, I would cite this differently from how I would cite this news source, which I access through the library database, right? In this article, we're going to show you in a second how to get to the databases. You'll see that they have provided me here with this source. It came from the Huntsville Times. There's a page number, there's the author, the section, the date, all of that I need for my works cited list. But I'm going to also need to indicate that this source was contained inside Newsbank database. And I'll need to cite that as well. I'll need to add that information to that citation as well on my works cited list. Whereas this one, I would only have to cite the author and title of this particular work and this particular source alone. And so how I access, even if they're both the same type of source, how I got to them is going to determine how it's cited on the works cited page.
Oh, and then there's the resources. So you get the MLA handbook. You can also look online at the MLA style, and it can show you different things also as well as out Purdue. And then APA also has a website.
So you were going to show them how to get to the databases and what those look like. And while she does that, I have a handout for you on, it's a checklist basically for evaluating internet sources. As I said, I'm not opposed to internet sources, and like I said, Google as well. But you want to have a guideline, follow a guideline in vetting those sources, right? So if you do pull up a Google list, a Google search, paying attention to the information that is provided by that source will help you to know how credible it is. The less information that a source has, if you don't see an author listed, if you don't see the date of publication, if there's a lot of missing pieces, you might want to question the credibility of that source, or at least go and find that same information in another source to compare it to, right? So this gives you sort of a checklist of things, questions to ask about any type of source that you find. And in particular, know that .edu and .gov sites will have a certain level of validity just by virtue of what they are. Educational institutions are the .edu site. .gov, of course, is the government affiliated site. So those are going to be the ones that you can feel pretty confident in their credibility. And so the information that you find there will probably be useful. So again, I'm not knocking Google 100%, but I'm just saying to proceed with caution and make sure you have a standard for the information that you use.
Okay, so for the library website to get to the online databases, you would just go to the library website. It tells you where to go, and then there's different databases for everything, for every subject. So if you're looking at psychology, you go to Psych Info or Psych Articles. Or if you're looking at agriculture, there's one for that too. So there's tons of databases on the library website just for you to look at.
And in addition to this list of databases that have different kinds of sources in them, there are also specific journals that are listed here as well. So if you think of a database as being the container, like Academic Search Premier is like a container that has inside of it multiple journals and publications in it. And if you do a search within Academic Search Premier, you can search everything that's in that, all the publications that are housed in that database at one time. So it'll pull up things from all kinds of different publications that are housed in that database. Or you can go to a specific journal that might be listed here. I don't know what agronomy journal is, but it's just one journal that you can go to, and when you search inside of it, you'll be looking at just one text and the particular articles that are in that one text. So it really depends on how extensive of a search you want to do. Do you want to just focus on one publication and what articles are printed there? Or do you want to do multiple publications and see what is available across several different texts? Then a database search, such as Academic Search Premier or ERIC or EBSCO, there's some EBSCO site that have multiple ones inside and allows you to search multiple things at one time. So you have some choices there, but just be aware that there are lots of good choices inside of these databases. And yeah, that's great. You can even select particular text that you want to be included in the search when you're searching in there. All right, so that was just bonus information there. Are there any questions? We've covered a lot, research and documentation. There's just a lot to cover, but we tried to kind of touch on a little bit of everything. Are there any specific concerns that either of you have as it relates to this subject? What do you mean master's report? What is the requirement for that document?
Okay, so my major is biology,
Mm-hmm.
and the minimum, all I know is the minimum is 25.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that we just have to figure out format. So
There's no work.
give me somewhere to go online.
Okay.
Graduate students that go to thesis and
Okay.
so I'm just trying to find the format that they require. And everything else out there.
Right.
Right.
I would inquire again of the graduate dean or your graduate, you have an advisor, or even if you could look at a previous master's report that was done by a previous student, that might be, because sometimes there are procedures that are followed within institutions that are specific to that institution. It may not be something that I'm familiar with. There's not a standard master's report that I'm familiar with, but the requirement for the A&M graduate school's master's report for your field may be one that has been created here, and there's a format that they have that they want you to follow, and it may be similar to something else, but it could also be very specific to your institution or your department or your the professors within your department that have created something that is the standard. So I would go back and ask again and say, I didn't find what it was that you directed me to. Where else might I look? Or is this master's report similar to something else that I might be able to find, let's say on Purdue OWL or in the APA manual? You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes they will take a standard document and tweak it for their purposes also. So you need a starting point, but whatever that might be, that the format of it is one thing, the content of it is another, right? So in addition to the format of it, you also need to ask the question, what does this need to do? What is the purpose of this document? What am I demonstrating within it? What am I needing to argue or show? And so that will be important to think about as well. Mm-hmm.
That's one option. Another way is
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, I would imagine so. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Okay. Good to know. Yeah. Sometimes those things are housed in the libraries also.
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Ask them what have other students done in your department when they produce those capstone projects, and they may be able to show you the examples from others that you can follow. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming, and again, let us know if there's anything else we can do.
I'm deciding to accept this.
think she does have a list over there for you.